All right, YouTube, in the wake of South Carolina, of course, there are only a couple days until Nevada's GOP caucus and the Democratic primary in South Carolina. The one last line of attack that is being used for the low information voting groups that are backing people like Rubio. That is the Karl Roves of the GOP, the old guard, the outdated like the Democrats are forcing an outdated 90s era dynastic candidate named Hillary Clinton down the throats of the Democratic voters using superdelegates. The Karl Roves and the Koch brothers, sort of the standard bearers of the old guard GOP, the Romneys and so forth. They're trying to force people like Cruz or Rubio down the party's throat because they want to retain their ability, especially to get donations and to fundraise. They're worried that Trump, if the nominee, as I predict, will be uninterested in such a thing. He's got a fortune, so he doesn't really have to care. They're worried about him being a rogue candidate who fundamentally shifts the party in such a way that the old guard donors, the old guard establishment figureheads, the Boehners and McConnells and McCains of the party, begin to look very outdated and get forced out of office by newcomers. It's all about the money, ultimately, when you really think about it. But the one last line of attack that they're dragging out now in their bargaining stage of grief, which shows their desperation. The one line of attack they're now able to use because Trump is obviously, he's not a joke candidate because he's won 2 of the first 3 states. He's probably going to win Nevada. They can't use the he's a liberal tactic since he's now leading amongst evangelical voters, which no liberal could possibly do. They've run out of ammunition except for one thing, and that's, oh, well, Trump has a low ceiling. As the race thins further, he'll be stuck and he won't rise above 40% or whatever. And if you add Bush's support and Kasich's support to Rubio, or Cruz drops out and endorses Rubio or something, then then Trump loses because he can't win anything because he's frozen at 33%. I would like to point out some archive data on RCP, though, from the last election, that is 2012, from the primaries then within the Republican field, that utterly demolished this myth. It's literally a mythology. It's been spun by people who are uncomfortable with the concept that Trump is the front runner of the Republican Party. They're hoping, though, that most people vote based on low information talking head tidbits and don't actually look back in the polling data to past races. I'm looking at the RCP's data right now for 2012. Romney won, of course. However, let's look at the data. Let's see where Mitt Romney was at on this day in 2012. And I've got my webcam down right now because I'm actually looking at this. Let's see. It is February 21st. What would the polling say then? Oh, Mitt Romney was at 28% in national polling at this time in 2012. Oh, and he was in second place, too. Who was leading? Newt Gingrich with 33.8%. See, he had just won South Carolina. He was in the midst of a surge. This helped him to win South Carolina. Then he declined, but let's see. Where was Mitt Romney at? Oh, 28%, 35%. Oh, he peaks around 37%. Then he goes back down to 34%. I wonder if he's ever going to rise back up. By April 1st, he had never been above 38%. It's funny, Trump at least has come very close to that. When does he finally break 40? Oh, April 11th, long after Super Tuesday. You see, the low ceiling argument doesn't make any sense. If we look back at the race in 2012, no candidate at any time rose above 40% until April, the middle of April, that is. Nobody. The front runner didn't, none of his challengers didn't, and that race remained as crowded as this one is well into the race. It wasn't a thinner field. It wasn't a more packed field, and so, it depressed Romney's results. No, he was fighting off Newt Gingrich, who was the same outdated figure. He was sort of like Romney, only, I guess, a little bit more religion-friendly. Romney was more the rich urbanite. Gingrich was sort of the establishment, the old guard, the insider, the I've been here forever candidate. Santorum was the evangelical. He was much like Ted Cruz is now, only arguably he was stronger than Ted Cruz, and he won more states than I believe Ted Cruz is likely to win. The front runner was hovering around the mid to upper 30s at this point in the last primary season in 2012. In fact, if you go back, you'll find Mitt Romney around September-ish of the last race was in the 30s or down to the mid 20s. I mean, he was in the high teens to low 20s, and Rick Perry was the front runner. Of course, Rick Perry very quickly wore out his welcome. Then it was Romney again. He still had 20% support. The race was never as crowded then as it was at the beginning of this race. Trust me. Then, who rose up after that? It was Herman Cain. Remember Herman Cain with the 999 plan, I believe it was? The one that 4 or 5 women said raped them. And so he obviously dropped out after that happened. Then Romney was briefly in the lead again. And now it's Newt Gingrich in the lead. In fact, he spikes up to 35%. Has there ever been a time in this race where any of Trump's challengers have been above 30? The answer is no. Even now that the race is much more thinned out, nobody else is hitting 25. And Trump is already above 35 right now. He's probably going to advance a few points above what he has been sitting at as well because he just won South Carolina. He has now shown that what Cruz said about, he can't get the evangelical vote, so New Hampshire's a one-off, isn't true. Mitt Romney only won New Hampshire. He lost big in South Carolina. He also got edged out in Iowa by Rick Santorum, even though it took him a few weeks to realize in such a close race that he had. Donald Trump is severely outperforming Mitt Romney. He is severely outperforming the person who went on to be the nominee. His polling is ahead of where the front runner was at this time in the last campaign cycle. The myth of the low ceiling is utterly and completely false. In fact, Donald Trump has a much higher amount of support than the insider, the candidate with all the super PACs and everything else, every other benefit he could possibly have. He is far ahead of where Romney was. Now, looking forward to Nevada, around that same time, Mitt Romney, of course, I believe won Nevada. He then spiked up, but he only reached 38%. I'm putting Trump well above 40 as soon as he wins Nevada. He might be above it right now because he won South Carolina. Newt Gingrich benefited from winning South Carolina the last time around. What do we know? Of course, the only 2 people who have won a race so far are Ted Cruz, who is in decline right now. He's not doing particularly well. He's perhaps the underdog now in his home state of Texas. That's not good for Ted Cruz. I believe he'll win Wyoming, and I believe he'll win North Dakota, and I believe he'll hold on to Texas, but I can't see him being competitive in the rest of the Deep South where the Baptists there, as with South Carolina, yes, they're evangelicals, they're born again, okay. They are also nativists. Trump is going to sweep Dixieland. He's also going to sweep the Northeast. And he'll do fairly well in a place like Oklahoma or Tennessee. He'll do well in these states. I believe he'll win most of the Super Tuesday states. When that happens, you could see Trump exceed 45 or 50%. Now, keep in mind, in the last election, also here, 3 candidates were still in the running at the very bitter end, and 4 of them were in until very close to that. Ron Paul maintained double-digit numbers throughout most of the race. Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum both while they were in there as well. Santorum dropped out shortly before the end and endorsed Romney. And that's really when Romney started to climb up, and he ended up at the very end, right before the convention, he finally exceeds 50%. I think that you could see Trump go far higher than that, 60, 70. It's not outside of the realm of possibilities. Yes, there are groups of people who don't like Trump. And yes, they are fractured. If one candidate that they happen to be backing drops out, some of those people will go to some other anti-Trump candidate. But a lot of them are going to see the writing on the wall. They want a winner. They're comfortable at this point because Trump has won 2 states and is about to almost certainly win a 3rd. They're comfortable with him now at a level that they weren't before. The Trump is an idiot, Trump is insane thing has worn off, and the last piece of ammunition being used is he has a low ceiling. But it's a complete fiction. If anybody has a low ceiling, it's somebody like Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, who have consistently polled below 30%. Trump has been above that most of the race. He did suffer a decline recently. However, then Rubio, who had been apparently grabbing up some of his centrist support, collapsed. And Rubio now is back down around where Ted Cruz is, in a state where, he should have been more competitive in South Carolina. He should have certainly not been number 5 in New Hampshire, because he should have done very well with the sort of small town centrists there. He should have been in the top 3 at the very least. He wanted to finish second. He finishes 5th. And he barely ekes out a second place victory in South Carolina, barely supplanting Cruz. The only reason Cruz didn't take second is because Cruz right now is undergoing a systemic nationwide collapse. If Cruz drops out, I believe that Cruz will leave before Rubio. He'll stay in, certainly. He'll still be in on Super Tuesday, splitting the anti-Trump vote, of course. Trump, I believe, is probably going to be around 42 to 45 on Super Tuesday, far higher than Mitt Romney was, because most nominees have won one of the first 3 states. You look at Mitt Romney. He wins New Hampshire, yes. He loses in Iowa and South Carolina. He comes in second place in both of them. Trump has won 2 and came in second in Iowa. And it wasn't a distant second place finish either. And he now has gobbled up a large amount of the support from the voting bloc that gave that state to Ted Cruz. The low ceiling argument makes no sense. Again, I'll put the link in the description. Look for yourself. Look for yourself at the standing of the race in 2012, which is now roughly commensurate in terms of how many people are still in. It's roughly similar. You can sort of ignore Carson, because Carson's, what is he polling at now? Like 1 or 2%. So we're not too worried or concerned about that. There are basically 4 candidates left that have some position there. And the similarity is definitely there. The difference is that the front runner is the outsider instead of Ron Paul this time. That's the first difference. The front runner is not doing poorly among evangelicals, as Romney consistently did until Santorum was gone right before the end. And the front runner right now is leading by a quite a bit larger margin than the front runner was in 2012. Trump is not a weak candidate. He's an exceptionally strong candidate. You simply haven't seen just how strong he is, because until now the race was fairly full. Mitt Romney was still fighting off 3 other people, and he was barely in the 30s at this point. Trump, until last night, was still up against 5 other people. Jeb has dropped out, and I think it would be, again, a mythology to say that all of Jeb's support magically coalesces behind one of his opponents, making them as strong as Trump is. It's either going to be split among all the candidates, or a lot of them are probably going to back Donald Trump. Why would they back Donald Trump? Because he's the front runner. A lot of the people backing Jeb were hardened support pragmatists from early on when he was the front runner. They're mostly worried about winning. Well, who is currently the front runner? He's going to get a disproportionate bump, I believe, and Rubio second to that, from Jeb leaving the race. Now, this will put Rubio clearly in a second place position. Yes, he becomes a stronger candidate. So does Trump. So arguably does Kasich. I think Cruz is really the person that gets left behind because, again, he has painted himself into the Santorum corner. And we've seen this. He underperformed in New Hampshire. He didn't do nearly as well as I expected him to do in South Carolina. I didn't expect the evangelicals to begin jumping on board with Donald Trump. That being said, I don't see how any other candidate can defeat him at this point. I think that the race is pretty much over right now, and a lot of people just don't Number one, the media will never admit it because they want a horse race. They don't want to make it seem like anyone's inevitable because they want to pit them against each other, get them mad, get some good sound bites, and get viral videos going. It gives them money. The media is never going to admit, yes, Trump indeed is inevitable. Every other candidate who ever won both New Hampshire and South Carolina goes on to be nominated. He's far ahead of where Romney was at the same time. He's got now about the same amount of competition while still being ahead. He's now gaining the majority of the evangelicals. He's got the majority of the independent voters. He's got a sizable majority of the centrists, far larger than Rubio has. He's also got a near majority and is not far behind Cruz among very conservative voters. What demographic is he not ahead in? The fact is, I think that what you've got here is a situation which a lot of the people supporting any of the other candidates would already be backing Donald Trump, the front runner and in many cases probably their second choice, if it weren't for the fact that these other people were in the race. As they drop out, as Jeb has, I don't think that they're going to disproportionately back Rubio or Ted Cruz, and nobody else is viable. I would argue, of course, Trump is the only viable one left. That's the other reason I believe his nomination is all but inevitable at this point, unless you've got some severe dirty tricks going on. Cruz is unelectable, not because of ineligibility, which is, I mean, it's a factor for me. It's not a factor for Ted Cruz's supporters, but because if he's losing the evangelical vote, that's the only group of people he was really dominant with in the first place. That and extreme hardline conservatives, which are a dying breed. The younger conservatives don't have tolerance for that sort of stuff. That's why he's declining. That's why he's going down in the polling right now. He's not going to win Nevada. He'll probably come in third. He could come in fourth in Nevada. Rubio is no longer viable. Rubio, unfortunately, what has happened is he's been branded weak, which doesn't help him with nativists. And I tell you this, if Hillary Clinton, who has a disproportionate amount of support in the Deep South among the black community, were to go up against Marco Rubio, Arkansas would become a blue state. Georgia would arguably become a blue state. You could see her chip away at the Carolinas, because he is now too weak on immigration, or perceived as too weak and too untrustworthy on immigration, to solidify the nativists that would otherwise give him the win with higher turnout. The Democrats are at a disadvantage, but you're practically handing them the election if you put somebody like Rubio before them, somebody who is not a particularly talented debater. It gets owned by Chris Christie of all people, is a centrist, can't really energize the base, is basically a slightly younger, less rich Mitt Romney. That's basically what Marco Rubio reminds me of. Cruz, meanwhile, has no chance of being the nominee. It's a 0% chance. It's not going to happen. He's painted himself into the same corner Santorum was in, but the difference is Santorum was briefly a frontrunner. Ted Cruz never has been. That's the difference. Mitt Romney, at 5 different points in the race, was displaced as the frontrunner. He was displaced by Perry, by Kaine, several times by Gingrich, and also towards the end by Rick Santorum. He was, in fact, for most of the race, he wasn't even the frontrunner. For the majority of the span of time, look at the chart. Other than early on when he's just the candidate with the most money. Once the debates and stuff started at the end of 2011, Mitt Romney spent a relatively short amount of time actually leading in the national polls. But there's only been one very brief window of about a week in the entire history of this campaign when Trump wasn't the frontrunner, and then it was Ben Carson, who was very briefly ahead of him by about 0.5 point. Mitt Romney was in a double-digit deficit behind other candidates at several points throughout the campaign. Most of them stuck it in. Donald Trump is utterly and completely crippling the legacy of Mitt Romney as a front-runner candidate in the last cycle. And keep in mind, you don't have an incumbent to fight. You have a pair of people on the Democratic side that want to be the nominee of their party, but you don't have an incumbent president to have to deal with. Where the nomination process is basically, do we all agree that Obama runs for re-election? Yeah, okay, well, here he is. It's a totally different race. It's the reason why the field was so crowded. These Republicans smell blood because they know that Obama is fairly unpopular, especially among a few key demographics that can help them win the election. And Donald Trump is in the best position of those still in the race to win it. He will I believe, he will not only retain the Deep South against Clinton's disproportionately massive support amongst the minorities there that would otherwise, it's like Bill. Bill turned Arkansas and Georgia blue. That would not happen if Trump was the nominee, because the nativists would literally walk through a minefield to vote for him. So that's not going to happen. He could get the backing, certainly Colorado, a state like Colorado or Nevada. He's got the showman quality. That gives him Vegas. That gives him Nevada. He has come out in support of medical pot and is ambivalent about legalizing weed, and thinks apparently it should be left to the states. That gives him Colorado, because they're not ingratiated to Hillary, who is against medical marijuana or was as a senator. She really shot herself in the foot, in her past actions, thinking ahead to when she would run again. She really fucked herself. New Hampshire, I don't think it's going to be any competition. They're not going to. The pro-gunners in New Hampshire are already fired up in anticipation of Obama's attempts to confiscate their firearms. They're going to vote Republican. Ohio, certainly, taking on Kasich as a VP, which I said is the only other person who's been actually campaigning for the same position Trump is. Kasich's the only one I can see him entertaining as a running mate. I still think it'll be someone who hasn't been in the race, but Kasich's the only one who might be there just because he happens to be fairly popular and a governor and from a swing state. That would give him Ohio. I can see him competing in Michigan based on jobs, based on the fact that he's not as oppositional to unions as many of these others are. A lot of times Fox and these groups, they talk badly about unions. Trump doesn't. Therefore, he's more competitive in the lake states. A place like Pennsylvania, certainly, whose economy has been degraded over time, especially in coal mining county. You would think Virginia would go heavily red if Trump is the nominee. I think most of the swing states would go for Trump, and I think states that generally are not thought of as swing states would become swing states and would be in contention. A place like Michigan, a place like Wisconsin or Minnesota, certainly. In some of these other states that are at least leaning blue, maybe the Pacific Northwest, Washington State or Oregon, you could see him compete there as well. He would completely destroy Hillary Clinton. I expect him to be the nominee because the polling I'm looking at from the last time around shows, again, he's well ahead of where the front runner and eventual nominee was. Mitt Romney ended up winning a majority of states, but his competitors won a decent number. I think about 15 of the states didn't actually end up going for Romney. Gingrich won a few, Santorum won quite a few. Ron Paul was continuously in second or third place in a lot of these states. What you see now, though, is a front runner who is a true clear front runner as opposed to Mitt Romney. And remember, they handled Romney with kid gloves because he was under the control. I mean, he was controlled by donors and lobbyists, just as Trump would state. He was controlled by the big money. Nobody had any opposition to him being the nominee because they knew they could get what they wanted from him. But they continue to talk about the low ceiling of Trump, even though it's completely fictional. These people aren't idiots. Obviously, they've seen the same data that I'm looking at right now. They know it's not actually true, and it points to the fact that the Republican establishment is so fucking suicidal, they're attacking their own frontrunner more than they're attacking the Democratic Party. You know why? Because it would be easier, arguably, for them to buddy-buddy with and control Hillary Clinton by giving her money than it would be Donald Trump. It would actually be, they have more in common with Hillary Clinton and her views than they do with Donald Trump. They're attacking their own frontrunner. Think about that for a moment and ask yourself if they aren't truly a little bit afraid that he's going to be the nominee. I think he will be, because his strategies and his wallet, honestly, are so far more advanced than all of the groups attacking him combined and all of his, all of the other people running combined. Yeah, I think he'll win Nevada and go on to be the nominee. Wait till Super Tuesday, though, because I don't think that Cruz is going to be nearly as much of a force to be reckoned with. Rubio will probably get Minnesota, and he'll probably be competitive in Florida. My advice to Trump would be let Rubio get a state so that he stays in. Let Cruz get a state or two so that he stays in. As long as they both stay in, they're going to fight one another too because they want the second place slot. Even when your nomination is inevitable, then you can get them to suck your dick in exchange for delegates or praise or an endorsement or helping you campaign or something. Gobble one or both of them up. Absorb them completely. Let them win a state or two so that they feel relevant. Otherwise, you're going to be running unopposed largely. And the problem with that is, of course, you're not being put through that purifying fire. Hillary's guaranteed to have Sanders nibbling at her the entire race, keeping her sharp. Trump needs to stay sharp. Not that he's not already obviously of advanced intelligence, but he needs to keep on his toes because Hillary is in a league of her own when it comes to being smarmy and passive aggressive. That's how she generally attacks people. And she also is fairly masterful at really taking people's attacks, turning it around, making them look like a bigot or a sexist or whatever. She even does it to Sanders. And Sanders is a democratic socialist, so she will definitely aim those attacks at the Republican Party, no matter who the nominee is. And I would say with about 99% confidence, Trump will be the nominee. It's not even close. Only one other candidate won a state. He won the state with a demographic that he now no longer controls. So, what the fuck? When are these people going to admit, yes, we've got a front runner. He's probably going to be the nominee. He doesn't even need to crack 40% until April in order to be the nominee. Romney didn't. He became the nominee. He won with a very large majority of the delegates. So when are these people going to wise up? Probably never, because they're scared of him, honestly. They're terrified because they think Trump will run roughshod over the Karl Roves because he happens to be richer and more powerful than they are. It's actually very funny to see them sweat. And Fox News, I hate Fox News. Fox News is a bunch of jerk-offs. Always has been, always will be. The only good thing that they do lately is keep Obama accountable, and half the time they don't even do that. They praise people like McConnell and Boehner, who refuse to stand in the way when Obama does something truly hideous, but then when Obama tries to do something like visit Cuba or something, they're all up in arms. It's like, what the fuck are these people smoking? They're on crack or something. They don't make any sense, and they do. They represent an outdated ideology. The demographics of the country are not the same as what they were in the 90s. That's why the Republicans smell blood. At least the outsiders do, because Hillary represents that era. And the Republican frontrunner right now does not. He represents the post 9/11 era. So I would say, with fairly good confidence, Trump likely to be the nominee. If he's nominated, very likely to win the general election. Because you're going to see the wind taken out of Hillary Clinton's sails the second she starts to try to rant about gay marriage, Planned Parenthood, immigration, or any of these things. And Trump gets the upper hand on all the issues. He's going to pound her into the dirt, honestly. And a lot of Sanders supporters aren't going to vote for Hillary Clinton. They won't. A lot of them are pledging. They won't support the Democratic nominee. They'll vote Republican, or they'll vote third party, or they'll just stay home. I expect most of them will stay home. Most of them won't vote for somebody with an R after their name. Even after they realize that Trump was for gay marriage in the 90s, a lot of them still won't show up for him. But that independent support, which is now a much larger voting bloc than it was in the past, is going to tip the election. It's already tipping the nomination of the Republican Party, not so much the Democrats, because again, Hillary, the superdelegate system, she runs the DNC through a proxy. She's got the entire game completely stacked in her favor. Trump is fighting an uphill battle, and he's actually doing better than she is. Maybe not in polling, but remember, there's only one person she's opposing, and she's considered inevitable. Trump is not considered inevitable, and he's still ahead of where Romney was. So it's a myth. The low ceiling, high floor thing, it just doesn't make sense. Look back at the polling from the past, and you'll see for yourself it's not the case. That's about all. Peace out.